Hey guys, it's Matthew here once again, and recently I tried to remake one of my more fun builds I thought that was from only a few leagues ago, and that was Voltaxic. Cast on crit as an Inquisitor using Battle Mage, so you get the Voltaxic damage as well. With bow cast on crit, so we are using Lightning Warp in the hat, and then cast on crit utilizing all kinds of lightning spells, and it's a very confusing build for me because I have no idea what setup I should be doing or feels best. A lot of setups feel pretty good, and a lot of setups perform at a pretty similar rate, so I've been rather confused getting this character to 93, something like that. We've already killed several Uber bosses, done some Uber farm. It's got a lot of damage, but I don't know what I should be doing with it for various skills. So the idea was to go the new Crackling Lance that has a lot of shock effect, go Voltaxic, go the shock scaling using Ashes of the Stars, and then I'd have up to 140% shock on the enemy, and then you can also, with that, combo some Lightning Conduit, or even the regular Lightning Conduit for clear. And as well as that, I was hoping to maybe have a weapon swap for Galvanic Field to scale off of that shock effect. I've yet to try the weapon swap sort of stuff, but I think it could have potential. It just hasn't really been necessary up till now. All we're doing is currently warping around like so, with Lightning Warp, and then I've been trying multiple skills, either the Crackling Lance that branches, either Arc that sort of branches, Lightning Conduit that doesn't require shocks, and then when we're ready for bosses or something like that, we do try out other situations and skills. And in this case, or this fight here, I think it's just plain Crackling Lance with cast on crit, and also a Lightning Conduit in the hat. I've also been trying out lots of different triggers for our cast on crit. So the new lightning arrow is actually the biggest surprise of that, because it functions kind of like an explosive arrow static strike hybrid, I suppose you'd call it. It sticks arrows in the enemy and then pulses, and then that can trigger cast on crit, and you can have up to like 5 arrows going off for something like 5 ticks. So once you actually stack up several ticks, it's just going to start proccing pretty wildly, and it performed really well, though it ended up being kind of similar to Blast Rain, and like I said, still couldn't really tell what was supposed to be happening or what was ideal in the end. Right now what you're seeing here is the Crackling Lance of branching. So this is the Crackling Lance that never turns into a thinner beam and just has its damage based around that. So it works pretty well for AoE and cast on crit. Couldn't really tell if it was doing much better than regular Arc, or if it was doing much better than Lightning Conduit that doesn't require shock, but all the same, with Rain of Arrows, that's the main trigger, I'd say, for AoE, and then pretty much whatever lightning spell you want in place for your cast on crit. It was really kind of confusing picking a spell, but it's kind of up to, I guess, whatever you like most. And then on top of that, you can use Barrage instead of Rain of Arrows, but it's a lot more directional, so it's a bit more complicated to use. Rain of Arrows ended up just being kind of more comfortable in general, I think. But the new Barrage does lend itself pretty nicely to cast on crit triggering as well. So there's lots of good stuff you can do with this sort of a setup, but I've personally just been confused as to what I should, or what I even like most. So all in all, it's worked out pretty well. Voltaxic cast on crit, once again, can do some serious business damage, can do some serious business clear speed. Over last build, the last time I tried a couple of leagues ago, I have incorporated a bunch of evasion and capped spell suppress so that I can actually take more hits, and I did that specifically because the league mechanic can do a whole bunch more damage to you than previous leagues. So having a build that has like absolutely zero defense does not feel good, and even with this, I think it's something like 70 or 80% evasion, capped spell suppress, bunch of damage, life at a decent amount with Eldritch Battery, Mind Over Matter. Even with this, it doesn't feel supremely comfortable against Lead Mechanic. Still plenty of times taking too much damage. And then, as you can see here, using currently Shock Nova as a test. And I don't think it's the play. It was just a bit of a test. It feels like it needs way more area, and then it still doesn't necessarily feel like it hits as hard as some other things. So it was a bit confusing once again. But Uber Bossing, I did a bunch. I killed maybe like 6 Mavens or something, Uber Mavens, trying to test out various setups, either Blast Rain or Lightning Arrow. Those were the 2 triggers that I was going with, but then there was either Crackling Lance with various setups, either Overshock or Lightning Conduit in the hat or Crackling Lance in the hat, and it's hard to tell what I should be doing or shouldn't be doing. But as you can see here, once your lightning arrows stack up on the enemy, you can just start running around, and when you're running around, your crit procs are just shitting out lots of laser beams, which are Crackling Lances. It just takes a bit to actually stack them up, so it is a bit of a ramping situation, and I don't know, maybe my attack speed isn't quite good enough to make it as good as it's supposed to be, but it's definitely effective enough, and I couldn't really tell the difference between the two of Blast Rain and the new Lightning Arrow for pure effectiveness. They had their pros and cons, and it just depends on the situation. If I was allowed to stack up against a boss, then I'd say I liked Lightning Arrow more, but typically it was just easier to get your damage going when you can't stack things up with Blast Rain, because it should be pretty much effective almost immediately at full pace. And then, as you can see, I've also incorporated RF into the build because I've got a bunch of regen, so RF for certain fights is certainly doable, but wasn't doing it for mapping because you do want a bit better regen. So with that, 140 shocks, big Lightning Conduit, big Crackling Lance, it kind of worked out. I'm really not sure how to feel about the build. Also got this Progenesis Flask, which is pretty nice, but let me go ahead and show you how I made the character up to this point. What we have is level 92 actually. I don't need Ralakesh Copium character name because basically when I was thinking about this character while playing the previous one, all I could think was that the current Ralakesh setup I had was basically by far the best way to build that character, this next character. So yeah, charge stacking, get 10 charges, get Ralakesh charges, crit, frenzies, you know the deal from the previous character. Basically, if you want probably the best version of a cast on crit bow, you're going to be looking at something like that, I'd say. So if you're going to try and build that, it's going to be completely different to this, but this is a different attempt and something that happened and came together all the same. So yeah. Level 92 Inquisitor, so we are based around the Voltaxic bow, bunch of lightning damage on it, lightning converted to chaos, chaos damage can shock, and then 40 max effect of shock. Hits with this weapon shock more, doesn't really matter too much because we don't hit very hard with our weapon, it's all about our spells. So with this 40 effect shock and then Crackling Lance, and using the ashes we have 34 max shock on our Crackling Lance, and then on our Lightning Master over here we have 15 max shock. It all comes together to be something like 140% shock, which you could see throughout some of the clips, but against Uber bosses it is still a bit of a dice roll. It's kind of hard to get 140 happening most of the time. But the idea was to get that much happening here, and then also have another Crackling Lance set up in our hat. But I've also kind of been experimenting with Lightning Conduit, the old one that still deals a bunch more damage per shock effect on enemy, especially with ashes it helps out more. So you can see about 30% more per 5 shock effect on enemy. If I like tick everything in my POB, and then assume that Lightning Conduit's scaling off of like the best, then it's hitting for like 10 or 20 million, but that is obviously going to rarely happen at the moment, and then it's in the Asenath's hat, so it's only proccing when I attack, which you can't even see because it's such a faint attack if there's no enemy nearby. But yes, it will be on a 0.3 second cooldown only when we attack, while this is going to be popping off pretty much all the fucking time, as you can maybe see here. The Crackling Lance here is a 0.09, so it's going to be 10 a second or something like that, whereas this ends up being, at the moment, 0.6 cooldown time. which I don't know, weird. But yeah, with our cooldown recovery, you can see that it does mean that we get a couple a second. In any case, it's based off shock effect, and for a lot of the build, I was using 2 Crackling Lances, so that every single time I'm attacking, we're getting a second Crackling Lance. So then it's just 2 Crackling Lances going off, and all the shock effect is really doing is making things take more damage, instead of utilizing it in any other way, like Galvanic Field or Lightning Conduit. So that's kind of the setup. We are based around an Inquisitor so that we can have extra crit over here, but more importantly, Battle Mage. So Battle Mage means that this entire 1 to 739 lightning damage is getting applied to our spells. So it's a pretty big upgrade, and that's typically why I've done these cast on crits with Voltaxic and Inquisitor, because Battle Mage exists. And then you also get a whole bunch of regen and extra damage taken against enemies for Inquisitor there. So it's pretty convenient. It's not a huge amount of crit at the moment because I haven't scaled crit that high through the strength and combo here. I've more just gone for like effective damage still and figured out crit in other means. But we've got an Ashes that gives us 28 quality. A quiver that you have to craft with Scorn Essences if you're doing bow cast on crit. Friendly reminder there, because global crit multi is what the Scorn Essences give you, while the regular crit multi on bows is just for bows, so you have to craft doing that. Asenaths, so we have a separate Asenaths that has Lightning Warp in it. Lightning Warp with Swift Affliction, Overcharge, and less duration, and that does mean that we port around pretty much instantly. And I will also mention that you can get an Asenath at level 8 on a bow build, and as soon as you do get Asenath at level 8 and put in a the new Frost Blink, so if you chuck this thing at level 8, I don't happen to have one laying around for some reason. There it is. Then it's going to be some of the fastest fucking leveling you've ever done. It doesn't need a whole bunch of links like Lightning Warp. Instead, it just goes off immediately from level 8 onwards. And then you just got to fix your mana, because mana is going to take a bit of getting used to with this Frost Blink. But you can see that you just start porting around everywhere on every right click, and it can just be as part of your bow setup very early on. If you're not even cast on crit or anything, it just helps for leveling bows. It's pretty crazy. So that's the new Frost Blink. It does teleport with no cooldown. The big difference is that it has a very slow cast time. So with something like this, it takes away the cast time altogether, so it just becomes instant. It's pretty crazy. Otherwise, I'd say it's a pretty normal bow CoC build. We've got some cooldown recovery and resist there. We've got some suppress and everything. I tried to cap suppress, so I got suppress on pretty much everything. Scaling some aura effects, some evasion, using grace. Where are we? Zealotry, Grace, Haste on a Divine Blessing, so I got to press that all the fucking time. I hate Divine Blessings, is what it is. And then as you can see, with flasks and stuff, about 70% evasion. I also blind enemies. I'm still not even capped on cold res. Who really fucking cares? And then I haven't got my last charm slot, but I went with suppress, and then 9% chance to deal 50 more damage, and also some res and 10% chance to deal 50 more area damage. So that's basically for just bigger, harder shocks off of the Crackling Lance. And then I went with a Watcher's Eye that gives some suppress on Grace and crit on Zealotry effect. And then a That Which Was Taken for a bit more power charge crit, and then that 50% chance more damage thing as well as a bit of blind effect. So you could stack up more of these crit power charge things if you really need the crit, but I tried to not rely on it too heavily. Otherwise, I think it's a fairly basic tree, and then also used a large cluster to get Overshock, Sadist, Durrani's Lesson, and then over here we've got Eye of the Storm with pressure points, a Balance of Terror that has Wither on hit when you use a Despair, and then cooldown recovery with Temp Chains. The Temp Chains one, it can get us to the next breakpoint of cooldown recovery. I don't know if I'm actually even utilizing it yet, but I do use it as much as I can, so I do cast Temp Chains fairly frequently, and then Despair on actual enemies. I don't know if I'm actually at any breakpoints, but in theory you can get to more breakpoints by doing that. And then also on here, Megalomaniac I needed for Sublime Form, which is Grace Reservation, and an Overshock. I was otherwise just going to do a small cluster, a medium into a small that gives Reservation, but this just barely got me capped, so I managed to do that instead. And then, yep, Cap Suppress. So feels good to have Cap Suppress, decent evasion, but at the same time still kind of squish against plenty of things. From the League mechanic, basically. Otherwise, I'm not feeling too bad. Especially when you're warping around like this. When you're warping around like this, without any freeze or huge instant AoE, then you can get yourself into a lot of trouble in plenty of cases. So keep that in mind when trying to play something like this. Otherwise, we have what? Wrath. So this entire setup here I was going to have with Galvanic Field, but instead I just could not fit it in. So I'm still maybe going to try a weapon swap Galvanic Field. That would have been the idea, but it's pretty tough to fit in with my current setup needing a lot of dexterity the way it does. Don't know what else to say. I think that's probably about it. Yeah, bit of a weird, wacky Voltaxic cast on crit. Don't know if I'd fully recommend it. Maybe if you did the whole Ralakesh route, it'd do just way better and way more, so look into that. But with this one, it is a decent enough example, but I really don't know where it goes for like various skills. I'm still a bit confused, but play around with Barrage, play around with the new Lightning Arrow. This one, like I said, stick arrows into enemies and then they pulsate. And with Ash's quality, it gives you 5 arrows potentially, and then they'll end up like pulsating quite rapidly and proccing a lot of cast on crits. So you can look into that as well. Otherwise, yeah, bit of a choose your own adventure setup, and went pretty well. I had a lot of fun with it, but I'm probably ready for the next project. So as far as MTX as well, new supporter pack stuff, the thing just to be, you know, lightning based, Thunderstroke, Divergence, whatever. So thank you very much for watching. See you guys next time.